Hello and welcome to the garden. So today it's a mixture of joy and woe. Let me show you the joy first. There's not a lot. My very first chilli seedling has appeared. The front runner this year is Hungarian hot wax, and I'm delighted that these have started to germinate. Of course, there are a lot more plants indoors where this one came from, and as I mentioned in the sowing video, I'm germinating them indoors because the temperature is better, and then as soon as they're up, as soon as I get round to noticing that they're up, I will bring them down to the greenhouse here where temperatures are a lot cooler. During the day it's not too bad, but at night the temperature drops in the propagators. It's a little bit borderline to keep these fellas happy. Ideally it wants to be 12 degrees or above. Really doesn't want to go below 10, because the idea here is not to keep them alive, but to keep them growing without a check. And if they get too cold, they're likely to experience a check in growth and they will just sit there and sulk, and that's not what I want. I want them growing away quite happily. Of course, the light level is so much better out here than it is indoors, and that's why I want to keep these down here. So I have a couple of these little temperature and humidity loggers. I know there are some fancy ones that you can get, and I'm sure they are wonderful, but these are just the sort of cheapest that you can find. I think they're about a tenner each. The batteries don't last a particularly long time, but actually I think they're reasonably accurate enough for what I'm doing, and they record the temperature. I can get it up on my phone. It transmits via Bluetooth, so these are dead handy for this time of year when I want to monitor the temperatures outdoors and see how well the propagators are coping with it. It's all well and good setting it to, let's say, 20 degrees and wandering down in the daytime and seeing that it's managing to hold a steady 20 degrees, but that gives you no idea what's happened to it through the night. So on the little app here on the phone, I can keep an eye on the temperatures. I've got the min and the max clearly displayed here, as well as the current temperatures, and then there are graphs of what's been going on since I set these up. So at the moment it's 3.4 degrees, which is a little bit on the low side for the middle of the day. The propagators here, well, they're running at 17.5 degrees, so yeah, that's not too bad. In theory they can give a lift of 12 degrees, and they certainly seem to do that. Obviously it's a little bit better in the greenhouse than outdoors, but yeah, it's not too bad, and daytime temperature is usually better than this. The minimums though, it's gone down to 5.4 minus outdoors, so that's a pretty low temperature, and it's okay at this time of year. I don't want that going into the spring when the pears start to bloom. That's what happened last year. It went down to -6 out there and I had damage to the pear blossom, but I don't mind that low temperature right now. Now that of course is in the middle of a cold night. When it went down to -5.4 outdoors, the propagators then, well, they managed 9.3 degrees. So again, they're running reasonably well, certainly better than the specification, but that is a little bit borderline for plants like the chilies and peppers. They would prefer a little bit higher than that. The good news though is that looking at the forecast, we're not due anything quite as cold as that for at least the next couple of weeks, and of course the general temperature is warming up. I'm expecting slightly better daytime temperatures next week, so I think that chili plant, it's going to be okay in here. It's a little bit touch and go, but it's okay. It's not going to get to the point where it's going to be harmed. The only question is, whether it's happy to grow on and develop here. And that, of course, is the danger with starting these too early. Before I had the heated propagators, I would not have started these quite yet. And I had to grow them on indoors, and of course they became rather more leggy. What I would do there is, if it looked like the daytime temperatures were going to be pretty good, and you can often get a nice sunny warm winter's day, even though the nighttime temperature can be pretty grim. If it looked okay, I would move the unheated propagators that I was using outdoors. Otherwise they'd be all rowed up in front of patio doors in our kitchen. And you can work like that, it's fine. I think it's a little bit better than to start slightly later in the year, somewhen maybe the first half of February, and you've got a slightly better chance of avoiding the really cold weather when they start to germinate. I've had them growing in our old polytunnel in unheated propagators, but again that was much later in the year, well into spring. So these early sowings here, they really do depend on the heated propagators. I think they're a fantastic investment. It does make this job a lot easier. Otherwise, you have to deal with the leggy seedlings. If you keep them indoors in slightly poor light, and it's not brilliant light in there. Even where I have these starting, they very quickly get leggy. Even that young fella, it wasn't there yesterday, it was there this morning. Even that has a reasonable length of stem on it already. So I'm certainly not moving them down here too slowly. Anyway, that's kind of the joyful part of this video. The first chilli has germinated, and it looks as though the propagators here are going to be able to maintain at least a reasonable environment for them. The bad news is that some of my onion seeds that I sowed a couple of weeks ago, they have not germinated, and today I've got to resow them. So I started 4 varieties a couple of weeks ago. One was white Lisbon. You can see these have started to come up. Happy enough with those. Germination is probably a little patchy on these because I did sow that seed reasonably thick in there, but that's a perfectly adequate clump for the spring onions. I'll plant this out in one lump. I'm not going to split them up or anything. So you don't want too many in there. They won't grow happily, but this will be fine. What else have I got? My favourite variety, that's the Roscoff onion. It's not doing too bad. There's a reasonable crop there. How many misses do I have? 1, 2. I think at the moment there are 3 misses. It's just possible that those are a little bit slower to get going. You can see maybe that 1 or 2 of these are only just coming through. So it's possible that something will germinate there. What I'll do today though is pop an extra seed in just to make sure, because I don't really want any misses in these trays. I think I'm going to need all of these when I plant out. So the Roscoff onions, they're also doing well. Here though is a tray of the Tropier onions, and I've got 2 coming up. These were multi-sown in thick clumps. There's probably half a dozen seed, maybe even a bit more if I was heavy-handed, but there's probably half a dozen seed in each cell. 28 cells, that's a lot of seed, and I've got 2 that are just poking through. Onion seed is reasonably quick to germinate if the temperature's good. So the temperature in here in these propagators is pretty good for rapid germination of these things. They will germinate just on a cold bench, maybe a little better in an unheated propagator. They'll do very well on a windowsill or indoors somewhere, and out here in these propagators they're going to germinate pretty quickly. Certainly within 2 weeks, probably about a week, 10 days, something like that. And the other two are looking fine. The Roscoff seed was new this year. The White Lisbon wasn't, but I think germination on that has been just a little bit patchy. The Tropea and the Long Red Florence, that was old seed, and that was probably a mistake. So there are lots of seeds which you can sow for, well, at least say 3, 4 or 5 years. Germination rates will tend to decline, but not so much that it's a problem. You can get good results with old tomato seed, with old peas and beans, that sort of thing. There are some though that you really need to get fresh each year. Parsnip is the prime example, and I think most gardeners are well aware that old parsnip seed is not a good idea, so I never sow old seed for that. Carrot as well. I think sometimes you can get away with a little bit of the old seed, but that's another one that's better bought fresh each season. Now the onions, they're a little bit borderline, so I don't know. I don't think it was too unreasonable to say that this was new seed for last season, and I knew it was old seed, and so in these trays I put a little bit more seed in than I did with the Roscoff onions. And this is a multi-sown one that had lots of seed per cell. So I don't think it's too unreasonable, but it is one of those that is probably best bought fresh each year as well. And I'm really stupid because I bought new seed, and I've got it here. I've got the Tropea onion from Seeds of Italy, and I've got the Long Red Florence from Premier Seeds Direct, and I bought those to sow this year. When I came to sow it, I decided I'd use up some of the old seed. In retrospect, I wish I hadn't done that, because now I've got to re-sow these trays. Now it is possible that 1 or 2 more of these will come up, but I think it's been long enough, and it's perfectly okay to resow at this time of year, but I don't want to give these, let's say, another week or week and a half and then realise that I really do need to resow these. So I think it's probably better overall to resow with fresh seed and have the confidence that in 10 days time I'm going to have a full tray again. So that's today's job. Well, before I resow, I'm going to give this a good soak. Really hydrate these cells again. I'm always a little bit careful with watering this compost blend because the coir in there holds a lot of moisture. So after I give it its initial soaking, I'm then a little bit cautious with it. But I'm re-sowing now, so I want to make sure that is thoroughly hydrated. I shall leave those 2 cells alone where they've come up. Now I know I was multi-sowing these, but I don't care. I'll sow those as individual onions. There's no reason to disturb those. I'm going to sow straight into this cell tray with the replacements. So I'll just make some little holes there. I shall drop the seed into those and then just cover it over again. Leave those 2 alone. Well, those cells are definitely soaking wet now, and this will drain quite quickly. I'll allow it to drain before I put it back in the propagator, and of course with a little bit of bottom heat that will quite quickly lose a lot of that moisture. I want to make sure that the seeds have a good chance to germinate before that happens. So fresh seed this time, and that's what I wish I'd done last time. So these are the trays where I want to multi-sow them, so I'm just going to tap in half a dozen seeds, something like that. Maybe not quite. I only really want these in clumps of ideally 4, but 3 would be all right. I want reasonable sized bulbs. You can have them in slightly larger groups, but I think at this sort of size cluster, the bulb size is quite reasonable. Right, I'll just take a little bit more soil and just fill in those holes, and that is that. I expect to see a full tray of onions in here in a week or 10 days time. If not, I don't know what I'm going to do. That will start to get a little bit late because there are not that many crops where it matters too much if sowing is delayed or something doesn't germinate. But with the onions, if you want good sized bulbs, you really do need to get them growing away fairly well early in the season, because that way they're going to have plenty of leaf to them when they start to bulb up. And if they don't have a lot of top growth, you're not going to get good sized bulbs. Right, but that is done. I think that's fine now. I will get that back in the propagator. Well, as well as the white Lisbon, I also sowed a few pots with some extra long red Florence in, because that makes quite a nice young onion as well. I had 1 germinate in half a dozen quite thickly sown pots, so again, that's a little bit rubbish. I'm just going to sow straight over the top of these, and I'll ignore that 1 fella that's on his way already. I'm just checking the compost just to see what sort of state it's in. It's absolutely fine. I was wondering whether I'd underwatered, because I'm well aware that this stuff with the coir in it, it can look dry on top and be perfectly fine underneath, but that compost is, I would say, just about right there. I'll give these another drop of water before I sow. Oh, hello. There's 1 more. Still, that's a pretty poor showing. I don't know if I left these whether I would get many more appear. Somehow I doubt it. The Roscoff onions, if anything, they were slower than the Florence and the Tropier onions last year, so I don't think I'd be any better off if I left them. So if I end up with an abundance in here, I can always thin them out a little bit. It's not a problem. It would be far worse to ignore this and wait for another couple of weeks, I think, anyway. There's no point being mean with this seed if it's not going to be good next year anyway, or it's going to be borderline. I might as well get on and use it up this season. Well, it's always a little bit frustrating when something goes wrong with a sowing. This time, really, it's my own fault. I'd bought fresh seed, but I didn't use it. Just to save a couple of quid on seed, I've wasted a couple of weeks. But never mind. I've got 3 more trays to resow. I'll do those now. We're still in January. It's not the end of the world. But it is the end of this video. So thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.